A winter storm could kill a medieval family in less than 48 hours, and yet millions survived year after year without heating, electricity, or insulation. But here's the question that should make you pause. How did they not freeze to death? And even more strangely, why did medieval Europe get colder and deadlier across the centuries? Yet ordinary people still managed to endure it? Picture this. The year is 1315. The sun has vanished behind thick clouds for months. Livestock are dying in the fields, and winter temperatures fall so low that ink freezes inside the barrel of a monk's quill. There is no central heating, no electric lamps, no modern winter clothing. So how did they do it? What did an ordinary family rely on when the only warmth available came from a flame the size of your hand? The truth is far more ingenious and far more brutal than most people imagine. Between the 13th and the 19th century, average European winter temperatures dropped by as much as 2 degrees Celsius, creating what historians call the Little Ice Age. Add hunger, illness, and poor housing, and the cold became one of the greatest killers of the medieval world. And yet, not only did they adapt, but some of their methods were so effective that fragments of them still survive today. Let's go back 1,000 years and step inside a medieval winter, cold enough to kill you, but full of strange innovations that saved countless lives. A medieval home in January was not a warm refuge. It was a trap. Most peasant houses had walls made of mud, straw, or thin timber. They leaked wind. They leaked snow. They leaked sound so easily you could hear your neighbor cough in the next house. Temperatures inside often matched the temperature outside. If it was -5 degrees Celsius outdoors, it might be -3 degrees Celsius inside. And the only source of heat? A fire pit dug into the floor, no chimney, no ventilation. The smoke hung low across the ceiling like a poisonous blanket. Families would cough through the nights, eyes burning, lungs stinging, but they had no choice. Heat was worth more than clean air. To survive, everything revolved around managing the fire. A single log could mean the difference between frostbite and survival. Children were sent into the forest to gather twigs, dry branches, pine cones, anything that could burn. They would hide their collection under their clothes to keep it dry as they walked home through snow. At sundown, families did something modern people rarely think about. They prepared for the night like going into battle. Most slept in the same bed, side by side, pressed tightly together. Not for comfort, for heat, because body warmth was one of the most reliable heating systems they had. Infants slept between adults so they wouldn't freeze. Sometimes even livestock, especially goats or sheep, were brought into the house to share warmth. Their breath alone could raise the room temperature by a few degrees. But the night brought another enemy, the fire burning out. A medieval peasant could not afford to waste fuel. So they used a technique called banking the fire. Before bed, they smothered the flames with ashes, leaving the coals white-hot but not burning. This preserved heat until morning. At dawn, one breath of air and a handful of straw could bring the fire roaring back. But warmth wasn't only about the fire. Medieval Europe developed an entire culture of insulation, without actually having insulation. Clothing was the first shield. Wool was the king of medieval fabrics. Thick, oily wool from northern sheep trapped heat even when wet. People layered it endlessly. Tunic over tunic, cloak over cloak, hood pulled tight. A peasant might wear 3 or 4 layers at once. Wealthier people used fur, fox, sable, ermine, but even peasants used sheepskin, rabbit, or whatever they could trap. The real secret wasn't the material. It was air. Layers trapped pockets of air that warmed with body heat, creating an invisible insulation barrier. Without understanding science, they recreated a principle that modern winter jackets still rely on. Even food was part of the survival strategy. Calories were warmth. A cold person burned through food rapidly, so medieval diets changed in winter. People ate heavy stews, porridge, thick bread, and salted meats. Hot drinks were rare, but warm ale or heated broth kept frostbite away. Many families saved animal fat all year because eating it during winter gave the body the energy to maintain heat. Why now? You may be wondering. If houses were freezing, food scarce, and fuel limited, how did entire villages avoid catastrophe? By living a winter lifestyle modern people wouldn't recognize. From November to March, Europeans slowed life down dramatically. Work hours shrank. Most tasks, harvesting, field work, building, were impossible in deep cold. Instead, winter became a time for small crafts, repairing tools, preserving food, weaving clothing, telling stories, and maintaining the home. In many regions, winter felt like an enforced hibernation. But there was something else keeping people alive: community. In the coldest months, isolation meant death. Villagers shared food, shared fires, shared tasks, shared clothing, even shared children when a family couldn't keep everyone warm. If one house managed to keep a fire burning all night, neighbors might gather there at dawn to thaw their hands before starting the day. This communal rhythm existed everywhere: France, England, Scandinavia, Germany, Italy, because winter didn't care about borders. And while cities offered more shelter, even urban homes could be dangerously cold. Medieval builders learned to adapt their architecture. Thick walls became common. Doors were built low to reduce heat loss. Small windows replaced large ones, sometimes covered with oiled parchment instead of glass. Some homes were built partially underground, using earth as natural insulation. In certain regions, longhouses were designed so people lived at one end and animals at the other, the warmth mixing through the shared structure. But even with all these strategies, winter was still deadly. Historians estimate that in some centuries, up to 1 in 10 people died each winter. Not just from cold, but from starvation, illness, and weakened immune systems. When winter hit early or lasted long, it created disasters. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, the endless winters of the 1590s, or the brutal freeze of 1709, when entire rivers turned solid, wine froze in barrels, and children died in their sleep. Yet something remarkable emerged from these struggles. People invented tools so effective that some versions are still used today. Consider the medieval cloak. Far from being just clothing, it was almost a portable shelter. Wool cloaks, lined with fur, could be wrapped like blankets, used as bedding, or draped over the shoulders of children and elders. In regions like Ireland and Scotland, cloaks were so heavy and thick that travelers could sleep outside under them. Hand warmers existed too. Peasants heated stones in the fire, wrapped them in cloth, and placed them in their beds. In northern Italy and Spain, there were terracotta bed warmers, ceramic pots filled with embers and slid under the blankets. Gloves were rare, but mittens were common, easier to make, better at trapping heat. Woolen socks were layered the same way tunics were. There was even a medieval version of indoor heating. Bakers, blacksmiths, and brewers often slept in their workshops because the ovens and furnaces kept the air warm. Monasteries developed advanced heating ducts beneath floors, primitive but effective. And then there were those who had nothing: the poor, the travelers, the pilgrims, the homeless. For them, survival depended on the kindness of strangers. Charity laws required monasteries to give out fuel or offer shelter. Churches kept warming rooms where anyone could gather. Entire towns organized winter patrols to bring people indoors, sometimes dragging them from the snow. Against all odds, this patchwork of strategies worked well enough that European culture flourished. Markets continued, churches stayed open, festivals filled the streets. That's right, festivals. Winter wasn't only misery. It was also the season of gatherings, storytelling, feasts, and rituals designed to bring light into darkness. From Christmas to Carnival, people used celebration to fight the psychological cold. Staying hopeful was not entertainment. It was survival. But what about extreme regions, Scandinavia, the Alps, the Scottish Highlands, where winter hit hardest? Their methods were even more impressive. In Norway and Sweden, homes were built of thick logs that trapped heat, and turf roofs created natural insulation. Families slept on raised wooden platforms to avoid cold creeping up from the ground. Clothing used layered wool, fur, and reindeer hides. People stayed inside for long stretches, working by the dim light of tallow lamps. In the Alps, entire villages organized winter routines weeks before the first snow. Food was stored in high granaries to avoid moisture. Wood was stacked in enormous piles. Homes were built around centralized hearths. Shoes were stuffed with straw for insulation. Even animals were strategically placed in the home to maximize warmth. In Eastern Europe, People relied on the Kachelofen, a massive tile stove that stored heat long after the fire burned out. It was a genius solution, far more efficient than a simple fire pit. And in Iceland, where winter could be life-threatening every year, families would huddle in a central room lined with wool, spending evenings reciting sagas to pass time and preserve culture. Stories quite literally kept people warm. Across all regions, survival depended on adapting, cooperating, and respecting winter as an enemy that never slept. But if medieval Europe had so many strategies, you might wonder, what happens during an especially brutal year? Let's step into one of the worst winters recorded in medieval history, the winter of 1408 in England. The frost arrived early. Rivers turned to glass. Farmers couldn't plow. Sheep starved in fields. Towns ran out of firewood. Bread prices doubled. People began burning furniture, carts, fencing, anything they could take apart. Wolves came closer to villages driven by hunger. Monks recorded a darkness that seemed endless. Yet even in these conditions, families found ways to cope. Parents took shifts tending the fire, walking in slow circles to keep blood moving. Children slept 2 or 3 to a bed. Entire neighborhoods gathered in the largest home to share heat. Some slept sitting up because lying down made the cold unbearable. And still, the moment spring sunlight returned, villages celebrated. They had made it. They had survived another winter without the technologies we take for granted today. But survival didn't mean comfort. It meant innovation. One of the most important winter inventions was not clothing or architecture, but time management. Medieval people organized their entire lives around daylight. Waking, eating, working, praying, everything adjusted to maximize exposure to the sun. In winter, they woke later and slept earlier, conserving heat and energy. They embraced a rhythm that modern society has forgotten, living with the seasons instead of fighting them. Even social rules changed. Winter marriages were rare. Travel was dangerous. Long-distance communication slowed. But local gatherings increased because being together improved chances of survival. Winter built community bonds that lasted generations. Now let's look at one more hidden truth. While peasants endured harsh conditions, the wealthy faced a different battle. Castles were freezing. Stone walls radiated cold. Large open halls were almost impossible to heat. Nobles wore layers upon layers of fur, some so heavy that servants helped them dress. Tapestries hung on walls not as decoration but insulation. Bed curtains trapped heat around the sleeping space. And yet even royalty sometimes woke with frost on their blankets. Kings and queens lived in cold almost as bitter as the poorest villagers. Winter was the great equalizer. But with all these struggles, what can we learn today from medieval winter survival? More than you might think. Their techniques reveal something profound. You don't need advanced technology to stay warm. You need strategy, insulation, layering, community support, fire management, efficient architecture, seasonal adaptation. Modern buildings use techniques inspired by medieval design, thick walls, small windows, layered materials. Winter clothing uses the same principle as medieval wool layers. Trap warm air, don't fight the cold directly. Even the idea of staying active to keep warm dates back to peasant families walking in circles to prevent numbness. And behind these methods lies a deeper lesson. Human resilience is astonishing. For centuries, ordinary people, farmers, shepherds, artisans, travelers, woke each morning in temperatures that would send most of us running for the nearest heater. They endured smoke-filled rooms, icy winds, long nights, and shrinking food supplies. But they didn't give up. They didn't collapse. They adapted, innovated, and survived. Every winter, every generation, across 1,000 years. So the next time you turn on a heater, put on a winter coat, or complain about cold weather, imagine stepping into a medieval January. Your house is made of mud. Your fire is small. Your breath fogs in the air even inside your home. Your family huddles together. And outside, the wind howls like a living creature. But somehow, you know you'll make it through because that's what people before you always did. If you want more hidden stories like this, forgotten survival methods, strange medieval inventions, and the everyday genius of ordinary people. Make sure to subscribe. There are thousands of stories waiting in the cold. Let's explore them together.